Everyone and welcome. In this lecture we'll look at indexing time series objects. We'll consider the following functions: the date range function, the period and period range functions. We use those functions to create a series of times. As usual, we start by importing NumPy and pandas. Let's first start by looking at the date range function. Pandas has a date range function. We can use that function to create a series of times. Let's do that, and we'll store it in a variable. Once we create those times, we'll save it in a variable called date. So I'll say date to be equal to panda.dateRange. That's the function, and it accepts start time, periods, and frequencies as we have seen before. So let's pass a start time. Let's say 2016 December 26, and then for periods let's pass 12, and let's set the frequency to be day. So we'll pass D. Okay. Now if I call our date time object, we have series of times starting with December 26, 2016 to January 6, 2017. Frequency is days. One thing we can do with this date time object is create a series. Let's see an example of that. So we'll call pandas series method, and then let's use the range function to create our series. So we'll pass range and then use length of our date object that we just created. So we can pass range length of our date time object that we just created, and then for our index we can simply pass this date object. So we'll set the index to be equal to date, and let's save this series in a variable called, let's say, date series. Now if we call our date series object, we see that we have a series: index, value, index, value. So date series is equal to pd.series, and then we used the range function and used length of our date object, right? So indexing range of length of date. Since we are using a range, it goes from 0 to length of our date function minus 1, right? So we have 11. And then for our index we used our date object, which is this, right? 2016 12 26 all the way to January 6. We can check the type of our index for our date series object by calling the type function. So type, and then we'll call our date series object. So we're trying to check the type of our index for the series, and we'll see that it's a date time index. So if I run this, we see that it's a date time index. So our index is date time index, and we can also check the value of our date time index, their associated value, and we'll see that the values are timestamps, or the values contain timestamp, right? So if I copy this, paste it here, and check one of the values. So if I check, let's say, index 0, that's the first element, we see that it contains a timestamp. So that's one thing to note. Our index object is a date time index, and the values associated are timestamp objects, right? I just took one of these values, but you can check the second element, third element, or so on. It will still contain timestamp objects. So similar to other data types like strings and lists, we can index time series. So for instance, if we take our date series object, so let's paste it here, we can apply index slicing. For instance, if I pass colon, that means show me from beginning to end. So if we run this, we get beginning to end, right? Similarly, if we do our date series, let's say, show me everything. Do you remember this? Double colon 2 means show me every other element. So we have the first element, right? Our first element, and then third, and so on. That's every other element. We can also apply negative indexing. For instance, if I say -1, index of -1 means the last element, right? So 11, that's the specific value. And if I want to see everything in the reverse order, we can say double colon -1. It means show me everything in the reverse order, right? So we have the last element, and then it goes down to the first element. Great. Next, let's look at an example. We'll create a series object by using the period method this time. Let's do that. So in the previous lecture, we have seen the period method, and we can use that period method to create series of time periods, right? So let's call the period method. Panda has a method known as period, and then let's pass some periods. Let's say October 2016, and then I'll pass a list of 3 periods. So what we can do is, let's include everything in a list. So we'll have 3 periods, pd.period October 2016, and then let's do the same thing for November and December. So pd.period will pass, let's say, November 2016, and for our third element for our list, we'll say pd.period and December 2016. And let's save this in a variable called period. Now if we call our period object, we'll see that it's a period, and it defaults to a monthly period since we only passed month and year. So what we can do next is use this period to create a series object. Okay, we'll use panda series method to create a series object out of this period time object. Okay, and we'll save it in a variable called period series. So pd.series, and what we'll do for this is use numpy's randn method. So np.random.randn, and then let's pass length of the period, length of period, and for our index we can use the period object that we just created. So period. Now let's see our series object, period series, run it. So we have a series with 3 indexes, right? 2016-10, 2016-11, and 2016-12. And the values, I use this method so that we can generate some random numbers. If you want, you can also use the method that we used earlier. Simply pass, you can use the range function and pass length of your period, and the values will be 0, 1, 2. Now let's check the type of our indexes. So we can say, we can use the type function and then pass our period series index. That index. So if we run this, we see that the indexes are of type period index, right? And if you check the value for our index, so if you pass the first or the second element, it doesn't matter, we'll see that the values are of period objects. So one thing to notice here is that series objects with indexes of type period index contain period values, contain period as their values. And similar to what we just saw, we can also index this period series objects.